Okay, hello everyone. I'm Alex Hamer, and welcome to my presentation, which is Baking Only Fans. So, the slide's not working. Okay, there we go. So firstly, who am I? Alex Hamer. I'm an image processing TD at SideFX, and I work on the Copernicus team, which usually means that I make stuff like this and texture and simulation nodes. So these are some of the things that we've added to Houdini 22 in Copernicus. So now in 22, we have even more compositing, utility simulation, and texture nodes. The ones here on the left are existing ones from last release, and then the ones on the right are existing. The ones on the left are new ones, and then the ones on the right are existing ones from last release, which we had some nice upgrades to. And today we'll be talking about these ones. So baking. So today what we'll be looking at is what baking is, the state of baking in Houdini 21, and some limitations that were there, the new workflow, the new bake preprocess SOP and COP, and then a little demo. So last release, we added the Bake Geometry Textures node, which allowed you to bake a low and high resolution model, and then take the geometry data from the high resolution and output texture maps from it, such as its curvature or normals or height, as well as any other custom attributes like vertex color or whatever you wanted, really. So what's the point? What can you do with these maps? Well, in the beautiful land of real-time rendering, we are terrorized by performance and optimizing, so baking is a great way of getting extra detail. You can easily use these bake maps, like in this example, to fake or create extra details without the sacrifice of higher polygon counts, which is a great application for games. You can see on the left the original high-resolution model, and then on the right, a low-resolution copy of it with the baked texture applied, and it looks practically identical. But it doesn't just have to be for optimization. You can use the bake maps to drive masks, to build materials, or use them to drive other effects. It's just a simple example of combining a few maps to add some visual detail to an asset. So there wasn't any major upgrades to Bake Geometry Textures this release. In fact, technically, we actually removed stuff from it, sorry. But let's have a look at what this node can actually do. So there are 3 tracing modes. So surface normal, which is where you just have your low and your high, and you get the baked geometry data from your high res. You have cage mesh mode, which is where you have your low and your high and a cage mesh. It's the same process almost, except you generally get better bake results from it. And then you have single mesh mode, which is just where you have your low and you treat your low as the high res. So it's useful for getting geometry data on a single mesh as texture maps without tedious processes or things that would not be as easy to get. But cage mesh mode was kind of annoying to do in certain scenarios. It was good for great bakes, and let's have a look at why. So let's first look at the default mode from last release, which was surface normal. So we take the normals from the low poly, we trace bidirectionally, and then we take the first hit that we get. This works okay for most scenarios, but there are some problem areas which won't be picked up or are going to be picking up areas that weren't meant to be seen, or it will just be a mess, basically. So in cage tracing, we offset from the low res mesh. We then trace backwards towards the high res, and we get our hits that way. And the idea behind this is that we basically avoid those problem areas, and we get better bake results. Last release, when in cage mesh mode, we had some options for how to customize your cage, such as its cage offset. And you could see the results updating live, but there was a major problem with this. Here you can see some footage from the launch demo last release. The issue is that you're kind of doing the cage adjustment blind and basing a correct cage on visual results or errors, which are the black parts there, where the cage is intersecting the high res. Since you couldn't see the cage mesh yourself as it was internally generated inside the Bake Geometry Textures node, you couldn't say easy without checking the baked map whether your cage was intersecting your high res, which of course would cause issues. And that was the main reason that the default tracing mode was surface normal. And these auto-generated cage parameters were only there as a backup in case you didn't have your own custom cage. So that spawned the creation of Bake Preprocess, which is a SOP and a COP, which is a new node that can be used as a preprocess to your baking, which can set up your cage mesh and your geometry for baking. So again, we're not just trying to fix a limitation on the backup parameters on the baker itself, we also want users to have a dedicated node for setting up a cage. So this is what the workflow looks like. You have your low and your high res. You put it through Bake Preprocess, and then it will help you generate a good cage mesh. And then Bake Geometry Textures will give you texture maps. Here's the interface of Bake Preprocess. Let's just cover it. I mentioned earlier that we took some things off the main bake node, and that was really all of the auto-generated cage options. So now this is the node that you'll do all of your cage setup on. You have your normals, which is a very important aspect of baking. You can customize how the normals are created, as well as something called cage softening. And let's have a look at what that is. So with a simple example of a cube with some bolts on it as our high res, and then a simple box as our low res, we expand outwards using our low resolution, but that could mean that our normals are angled, slanted along the flat face. So when we bake, we can see that the bolts are skewed at an angle, which is obviously something we want to avoid. So instead, if we split the cage mesh at the UV seams, or technically in this example of a box, the faces, the bolts are now baked straight on. Once we adjust the normals, sorry, the bolts are now baked straight on, which is correct. And there are other ways around this issue, such as skew map painting, but we won't cover that today. Going back, we have our ray start and ray end offsets. So ray start is your cage, and then ray end offset is how far the rays will travel past your low res. By default, we have no ray end offset though, so we have infinitely traveling rays. So let's have a look visually as to what that actually looks like. So we have our low resolution, and then our high resolution with lots of detail. So we expand outwards as our copy of our low res, and this is our cage, which fully encapsulates our high res. Then we fire backwards towards the high, like what we covered earlier. We can also add a ray end mesh, which is another duplicate of the low res, which we offset inwards, which has to sit fully inside the high resolution, and we can then trace all the way from the cage mesh to the ray end mesh. This is useful if you wanted to stop baking at a certain point, or there was certain other geometry lying around that you didn't want to be picked up by the tracer. Then lastly, we have the cage attributes, which store the cage data which sit on the cage geometry output. And this is what the bake geometry textures node will use to figure out how the ray should behave. So that's pretty much the whole interface of bake pre-process. So let's use it. Here's a cool high-tech fan asset. Admittedly, the low res is still pretty high res for game standards, but if you think of it as a hero asset, it works. So don't ask any questions. So let's enter Houdini and use our bake setup recipe to set up a baking network, and we can link our low and high res. So now we have our geometry ready to be baked. Then we have bake preprocess in the network, so we can enter its interactive state in the viewport by pressing enter. And then you'll firstly see an orange mesh around your main mesh, which is your cage. So we can do things like change its opacity and change what it's comparing to, whether it's comparing to nothing, or the low res, or the default, which is the high res. So you can probably see some Z fighting there, and that's because at the moment our cage has a 0 offset distance. So it's intersecting with the high resolution mesh, and as I mentioned, this is going to cause big issues. So a way to solve that is to turn on highlight intersections, which makes the high res red and the cage mesh a bright blue. So then I can zoom in and adjust interactively within the state the cage offset till I have no more red, and then I know it's probably safe to bake. That's not the only way we can adjust the cage. I mentioned earlier softening the cage. So I can do that by UV seams. So you can see that happening. I'm adjusting the cage offset, and it's being split across the UV seams. I think I also maybe mentioned earlier that there are other ways of doing it, such as by faces, or if you want to get really custom, you can do it by an edge group. Or we can even adjust it as an attribute. So I'll quickly add a float attribute to our low res. Then in bake preprocess, I can scale the ray start offset by a very, very sensibly named attribute. And then it's a little hard to see at first, but if I make it a little bit dramatic and turn off the model preview, you should see that it's being scaled variably across our mesh because of our attribute. You can also adjust the end offset as mentioned. So I'll clip the geometry in half within the state, and then I'll zoom into a section, and we can see once I enable it, the purple ray end mesh appears, and then I can adjust it so that it's sitting inside the high resolution. Oh, I spoke too fast. You get the idea. I can then set up a simple material using occlusion and curvature, I think, and then I can see the results updating on previous material across all UDIMs at once. Once I adjust the cage distance, you can see once I enable softening cage, the results change again. And then once I'm happy with it, I can move on to making some materials from my baked maps. So we'll build a comp material. Here's our bake setup. And then we're using these baked maps to drive various components, such as, in this example, we're using shape scatter and curvature to drive where scratches are placed on the model. Or we can use various maps to control how various noises or colors are placed, basically using them to drive shaders. And then we can see it all together on the proving material across all UDIMs. The lighting might look a little wonky in the viewport, but that's because this was made for Unreal. So the normals aren't really what the viewport or Copernicus expects. So we can then bring it into Unreal itself by setting for simple material in Unreal's material editor. And then here we have the final setup in Unreal. That's pretty much it. That's not just, there's a few more slides. I've got thank you slides. Huge thank you to Leiwu at Internet SideFX for helping with this presentation, for the model and the textures and the baking the Unreal setup. He's a very talented technical artist, and he'll be available for hire end of September. Big thanks as well to Omar, Fiona, Ali, Mark, Nicola, Jeff, Nada, and Ethan for helping with this release, the Python states, and this presentation. As well, if anything that I said in this presentation didn't make sense, there's a button on every node in the top right. It's got a question mark. We have a very good docs team, so that's your backup. And that's it. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah.
Oh no, it's George.
Yeah, no, that's better.
Looks great.
Thanks.
You've wasted about 6 months of my time now
Sorry.
building my own baker. But I was curious about the visualization in COPS. Are there any plans to fix it so that there's like a conversion to get it to render correctly while you're in the Houdini context?
Visualization in COPS, what do you mean, sorry?
So you mentioned it didn't look correct because it was set up with the maps for Unreal.
Are
there any plans to just add some additional nodes to sort of get it to look correct in Houdini?
Not it doesn't exist yet. If you want to submit an RFE, I'm happy to look at that. Yeah, at the moment, like preview material can only handle like its own type of normals. So yeah, sorry.
And if anybody has any questions about Natsura, which is a foliage system based on Houdini, George Holm is right here. He's one of the co-founders. Talk to him later.
Thanks for the great talk. I was just wondering, in the baker, is there, like in Substance Painter, how you can bake per part, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Is there like a feature, like a drop down where we can like add like different components? So if you've got like a really complex model, but maybe you want to bake out to like different materials or textures or UDMs or something like that, is there like an option where we can sort of match like the parts together, like the high res and the low res within the same bake, or do we have to do a different
I think
bake for each part?
Oh, I went too far.
Sorry if you already covered that, by the way.
No,
Thank you.
I didn't cover it, but you should be able to see it. Okay. No, okay, right at the bottom there, you see match pieces by name. So you can do it, yes. And you can basically just have a name attribute on your low and high res that match, and then it will do it basically in its own, it'll do the baking in its own pocket mention for each bit. So, yeah.
Excellent question. That gets a flippy. Not every excellent question gets a flippy, but some do. Any other questions? We are all good. Nice work. Thanks, Alex.